Hello everyone. For learning outcome number 3, we're going to be covering now the large intestine, more specifically the histology of the large intestine. The large intestine will run from the appendix all the way to the anus, and despite it being about 1/2 as long as the small intestine, it is called the large because it is more than twice the diameter of the small intestine. So the small intestine is about 2.5 centimeters and the large intestine has a diameter of about 5 centimeters, so about twice as much. And the large intestine basically will frame the small intestine on 3 sides. So the small intestine will sit right over here as we have seen, and we can see on this image part of the small intestine, more specifically the last compartment, which is the ileum. The large intestine will be subdivided into 4 main regions, which are the cecum, the colon, the rectum, and the anus. Let's start again with the ileocecal valve, which is located at the opening between the ileum and the large intestine, and it will control the flow of chyme from the small intestine into the large intestine. And again, it is called the ileocecal valve because it connects the ileum of the small intestine to the cecum of the large intestine. Therefore, the first compartment of the large intestine is the cecum. Once the cecum receives the chyme from the ileum, it will continue with the absorption of water and salts. The appendix, which can also be called a vermiform appendix, is this winding tube that will attach to the cecum. As we already know from our lymphatic system lecture, it contains lymphoid tissue, suggesting that it will have an immunologic function. However, at least one recent report suggests that a survival advantage is conferred by the appendix, which is that if you have a diarrheal illness, then the appendix may serve as this bacterial reservoir that will repopulate the enteric bacteria for those that are surviving the initial phases of the illness. Moreover, its twisted anatomy provides this haven for the accumulation and multiplication of the enteric bacteria. But as we have seen already in our lymphatic lecture, there is a high incidence of appendicitis, and then individuals that do have appendicitis have to remove their appendix, which is called appendectomy, and individuals that undergo appendectomy do live normal lives. Next, we have the colon. So the cecum will blend seamlessly with the next compartment, which is the colon. Upon entering the colon, the food residue first travels up the ascending colon on the right side of the abdomen, and at the inferior surface of the liver, the colon will bend to form what we call the right colic flexure, which can also be called the hepatic flexure because it is, like I said, right under the liver, and becomes, after the flexure, the transverse colon. Then food residue will pass through the transverse colon and travel across to the left side of the abdomen, where the colon will angle sharply immediately inferior to the spleen at what we call the left colic flexure, which can also be called the splenic flexure, as it's located right under the spleen. And from there, the food residue will then pass through the descending colon, which runs down the left side of the posterior abdominal wall. And after entering the pelvis inferiorly, it becomes this S-shaped sigmoid colon, which extends medially to the midline. Notice how now it's running all the way to the midline. Then the food residue leaving the sigmoid colon will enter the rectum in the pelvis. And the rectum will extend anterior to the sacrum and the coccyx. On this image over here, we can see the sacrum over here, and this would be your coccyx. So this would be your sigmoid colon going down and coming up over here, and then it continues as the rectum. Even though rectum is Latin for straight, this structure will actually follow the curved contour of the sacrum, and it will have 3 lateral bends that will create a trio of internal transverse folds that are called rectal valves, which we can see right over here. These valves, they will actually help separate the feces from the gas to prevent the simultaneous passage of feces and gas. But sometimes you can't prevent them from coming out together, right? Hopefully there's no one around when this happens. And finally, food residue reaches the last part of the large intestine, which is called the anal canal, which is going to be located completely outside of the abdominal pelvic cavity. This structure will open to the exterior of the body at what we call the anus. So the anal cavity includes 2 sphincters. The internal anal sphincter, which is made of smooth muscle, and its contractions are going to be involuntary, meaning that you don't have control over it. And on the outside, we have the external anal sphincter, which is made up of skeletal muscle, which is under voluntary control. So it means that you are able to control defecation. Lucky for us, right? But except when defecating, both will usually remain closed. Unless you're passing some gases, then they will open up for a short period of time. With regards to the histology, we can see that the large intestine wall will have all the 4 layers that most of the other parts of the digestive tract present with. So it will have the mucosa, the submucosa, the muscularis externa with the circular muscle layer and the longitudinal muscle layer and the serosa. But they will have some notable differences between the walls of the small and large intestines. So for example, there are going to be few enzyme secreting cells that are found in the walls of the large intestine, and there are no circular folds or villi in the large intestine. Other than in the anal canal, the mucosa of the colon is going to be simple columnar epithelium that's made mostly of enterocytes, which are the absorptive cells and goblet cells. And these goblet cells, they will secrete mucus that will help with easing the movement of feces and also protecting the intestine from the effects of the acids and gases that are produced by the enteric bacteria. Enterocytes will then absorb water and salts as well as vitamins that are produced by these intestinal bacteria, which we have already seen in the small intestine as well. Notice the presence of these large lymphoid nodules that are going to be scattered throughout the lamina propria and that will extend into the submucosa. And this is to help out with any bacterial infection that might occur in the large intestine. Another difference that we can see is that the longitudinal muscle layer is actually shortened when compared to the rest of the digestive tract, and it will form what we call a tenai coli. So it is still made up of smooth muscle, but it's thinner, and we will see on the next slide how it is arranged within the large intestine wall. The submucosa and the muscularis externa will continue to have the nervous plexus because we do need to have contraction, muscle contraction, and gland secretion. Therefore, the submucosa will contain the submucosal plexus, and the muscularis externa will contain the myenteric plexus between the circular muscle layer and the longitudinal muscle layer. There are 3 features that are unique to the large intestine, which are the tenai coli, the haustra, and the epiploic appendages. The tenai coli are these 3 bands of smooth muscle, like I said, that make up the longitudinal muscle layer of the muscularis of the large intestine. except at its terminal end. So there will be no teni coli in the rectum. Tonic contraction, which means these sustained contractions that will maintain a continual muscular tension of the tenicola, will bunch up the colon into a succession of pouches that are called haustra. If you're talking about just one pouch, you refer to them as haustrum. And these haustra, which are going to be responsible for this wrinkled appearance of the colon, are going to be responsible for a continual breakdown of the chyme that's passing through the large intestine, as the pouches form sort of like a segmentation process where it churns the contents inside of the large intestine as they move down from one compartment to the other. So even though the propulsion of food is done by peristalsis, those pouches, they create a churning that is similar to what occurs in the segmentation process. For me, this reminds me, for example, of when you're creating a curtain and you have this line and you have to pull on the line to create the ripples on the curtain. So the line would be the tenicola and the rippled effect would be the haustra. Then attached to the tenicola are these small fat-filled sacs of visceral peritoneum that are called the epiploic appendages. And the purpose of these epiploic appendages are still not well known. And although the rectum and the anal canal, they don't have either the tenicola nor the haustra, they do have well-developed layers of muscularis that create this strong contraction that's needed for defecation. Now remember that most of the large intestine will have a simple columnar epithelium. However, the stratified squamous epithelium mucosa of the anal canal will connect to the skin on the outside of the anus. And this mucosa varies considerably from that of the rest of the colon, and this is to accommodate the high level of abrasion as the feces passes through the anal canal. In our lab models, we can clearly see the large intestine. Here, we're going to see the ileocecal valve, so this would be part of the ileum entering into the large intestine. So this part over here would be the cecum. We can see a little bit of the appendix right over here. This model over here is the same as this one. So here would be your ileocecal valve. This whole segment would be your cecum, and this would be your appendix. Going up, we would have the ascending colon. Underneath the liver, we would have the right colic flexure. Then this would be the transverse colon. This would be the left colic flexure underneath the spleen. This would be the descending colon. And then once it starts over here with the curvature would be the sigmoid colon. We can see on this other image over here the same thing. So this would be your appendix. This would be the cecum. So this is a posterior view. This would be your ascending colon. You can see a little bit of the transverse colon over there. This would be your descending colon. And right over here on the curvature is a sigmoid colon. Once it starts to go straight from here, it would become your rectum. And at the end is where you have your anal canal with the anus and the two muscles. The one that's on the outside would be your external anal sphincter, and the one that's on the inside would be your internal anal sphincter. So this would be voluntary, and this one is involuntary. In addition, we can see the tenicola going around over here, and all these little pouches are the haustra. None of these models will have your epiploic appendages.